The Atari Jaguar CD was intended to be a thing right from the beginning of the console's retail life. It suffered many delays and issues, and seems to have released as a way to bring in a little more profit, rather than to be a real contender in the industry. Barely any units hit store shelves, and it was discontinued almost as fast as it came. Because of this, it's an expensive curiosity for many Atari and retro gaming fans, and most will never get to experience it in person. Luckily, with the improvement of emulators and the release of things like the Atari Jaguar Game Drive, the 13 retail releases and modern homebrew games can be experienced more easily than ever before. And you heard me right, this baby had only 13 releases. But that shouldn't be a surprise when you hear the rest of the story about the Atari Jaguar CD add-on. So, why don't we dive in and share what little bit of information is available on the little add-on that should have never been. The Atari Jaguar CD was actually announced even before the Jaguar's release in November of 1993. It was always meant to be an add-on for the console, and one that Atari fans were no doubt excited for. CDs were going to be the next big thing in video games with their ability to hold tons of data and storage, along with high-quality music, audio, and full-motion video. Sega released their CD add-on in 1991 for Japan, and in 1992 for the US, and even Nintendo was making deals with CD pioneers like Sony and Philips to release their own Super Nintendo CD units in the future. So of course Atari had to get in on the action, and I'm sure it was thought of as a smart move initially. But what did the Jaguar CD actually add to the console, and was it really worth picking up upon its release in late 1995? Now I don't think that it will be a surprise to anybody who watched my previous videos, but I'm not a very technical guy when it comes to these old video game consoles. I don't usually have the best understanding of the inner workings and what each component is responsible for, but it's to my understanding that this thing sat in the cartridge slot and essentially acted like a pass-through for other cartridge games. And the only thing it added to the Jaguar was the ability to read data off CDs using the CD drive. So unlike the Sega CD and planned Nintendo CD add-ons, it didn't really have its own processor or GPU, and it didn't really beef up the Atari Jaguar's technical prowess at all. Seems like a missed opportunity if you ask me. But the ability to have upwards of 790 megabytes of game storage was incredible. This would allow for long, movie-quality intros, and more robust CD-quality sound to be played right off the disc. But for $150 MSRP, it would have still been nice to have it add some muscle to the already disappointing Atari Jaguar. Cosmetically, many people refer to the combination of the Jaguar and the CD unit as looking like a toilet. As a matter of fact, a video exists of one individual using it in such a manner. Those crazy kids. But if you ask me, I actually like the way it looks. I mean, yeah, it looks like a toilet when it's all together, but there was something that just felt powerful to me about this thing. I remember seeing pictures of the Sega Genesis with the 32X and CD add-ons, and feeling like that looked incredibly powerful too. I feel like it's sort of an enhanced Super Console, but the majority of people seem to agree that these things look more like life support for an aging console than what I think. Anyway, today I'm happy that the CD unit didn't really add anything to the base console, because I can now experience these games with the help of the Jaguar Game Drive, which is much more affordable than the failing CD units, and these things are well known for failing. Seriously, only 20,000 of these things were estimated to be produced and sold, and I have to believe that nearly half of them have failed already. They were not quality products, to be sure, but let's take this opportunity to see what kind of games could be experienced on the unit, and if it was worth picking up in late 1995. So let's dig through a couple choice selections from the library. And the game I probably was most excited to try was Iron Soldier 2, and the improvements to the presentation were evident right from the start. There was a long intro sequence that honestly is a bit dull and prodding by today's standards, but back in the day it would have been pretty impressive. You also get various cutscenes and animations between levels. It plays nearly identical to the original as you pilot a 40-foot tall mech and go up against helicopters, tanks, turrets, and even enemy mechs. This game is also available on cartridge from Songbird Productions, but it seems the CD version is probably the full game they had envisioned, with all the extra cutscenes and audio. And the CD is cheaper to boot. Not a bad experience, and a pretty solid way to start my journey with the CD add-on. Primal Rage was an Atari-developed and published arcade game that I was really infatuated with back in the early to mid-90s. I had always loved claymation from things like Jason and the Argonauts, and this game definitely had that feel. It wasn't as blatant as, say, Clay Fighter, and it definitely felt much cooler than that fighting game in my opinion. I mean, what is cooler than dinosaurs and giant apes fighting each other for the right to rule the planet? And I've experienced various versions in the past, like the Genesis, SNES, and Saturn ports, and this one is pretty good and more in line with the Saturn release. Well, as far as I can remember, it has been a while after all. The moves are extremely tricky to pull off, but the animations look good, and the game plays pretty well all things considered. Another solid game, but not worth the cost of entry to play it on real hardware, especially since it's available on so many other places, or even through MAME.
Rage.
Highlander was one game I really didn't want to try or play, but I did eventually give it a go. And, well, it's pretty rough around the edges. Apparently, this game is based on the Highlander animated series, and there are several minutes of the cartoon being played at times, which is actually cool. The game uses tank controls, like those popularized by Resident Evil in the mid-1990s, and it wasn't as hard as I expected to move the hero around. But the combat, boy, the combat is tough. Most attacks have sort of a wind-up period, where you can easily get hit and sent stumbling backwards. Some enemies die in one hit from a strong attack, and the combat didn't feel awful in these sections. Still, it wasn't good, but not awful either. But when you come up to somebody who can endure a lot of punishment, well, the game starts to drag and drag. Overall, if Alone in the Dark early 3D style graphics and tank controls don't bother you, then you might be able to get a little enjoyment from this one. But once again, it's not worth the cost of entry to experience it. Now, I personally have always loved the old Don Bluth arcade games like Dragon's Lair 1 and 2, and Space Ace to a lesser extent, so I was really excited to see that these were available on the console. Well, at least Dragon's Lair and Space Ace are available on the console, and Dragon's Lair plays about as well as I remember, but it's not very forgiving. These games require a ton of trial and error, and I usually prefer the versions that give you an extra second or two to hit a button or direction. But the visuals look excellent on an old CRT. Overall, these games are difficult, frustrating even, and won't be an experience for everybody. But these versions are worth a look for fans who have access to them, in my humble opinion.
Dragon's Lair, the fantasy adventure where you become a valiant knight on a quest to rescue the fair princess from the clutches of an evil dragon.
Myst was one of those games that I remember hearing people rave about in magazines. And I always felt like, because of that, I needed to enjoy it, or else I wasn't a real gamer. So I felt ashamed the first time I played it, and felt confused, and worst yet, bored. The idea of an adventure like this one was very foreign and nearly incomprehensible to a young mind like mine. But I've grown to appreciate it more and more. I found other similar adventures that I enjoy a lot, in games like Dracula Resurrection on the PlayStation 1, along with Siberia and Still Life on the Xbox. This version of Myst looks and plays very well. And if you can put yourself back into the mindset of gamers back in 1995, you might be able to remember or realize how impressive this game truly was. Next, I tried the Jaguar version of Blue Lightning, and all I can say is the console needed more action like this. It's a ton of fun and action-packed. I always enjoyed games like this one, and I'm glad I can experience it thanks to the Jaguar Game Drive, because it's simple, old-fashioned fun. There are the expected FMV and audio enhancements that come from the CD drive, but so far I think this could have been dumbed down to a cartridge game, and would have done just fine. Or maybe the cartridge lacked the space for all the animations? I don't know, but I did enjoy giving Blue Lightning a go on the Jaguar CD. And that's really it for the games that I experienced firsthand. I tried to download several versions of Battlemorph, but I couldn't seem to get that game to load at all, and I had similar issues with World Tour Racing. These were two of the main games I was interested in looking at, as Battlemorph is what I believe to be the sequel to Cybermorph, and I wanted to see if World Tour Racing was actually improved over the dismal checkered flag. Oh well, for another time I suppose. But honestly, I felt the majority of games that I experienced were pretty fun, and would have been technically impressive for the time. Now, some people might argue that the Jaguar CD should have been a component of the Jaguar right from the start, and I understand that argument. They definitely could have done a lot more with the CD format rather than staying with cartridges, but it would have taken time and money that Atari just didn't have. The Jaguar was pushed out the door in hopes that it would bring in some profits. Atari was entering into some bleak years when it came to finances, so they really couldn't wait for the CD to be incorporated or to redesign the console to include it right out of the gate. And I'm honestly surprised they spent precious time and resources on this CD add-on and the VR headset that we'll talk about another time. These things sound like money sinks to me, but this is the 90s Atari that we're talking about. The games for the Jaguar CD definitely feel much larger and like a generation up, where the games on the cartridge felt more like the 16-bit stuff that came previously. Atari shipped 20,000 CD units, and they had to have done this in order to recoup any and all money they could from the project. As time has proven, they weren't in the best functional state, and most Jaguars themselves proved to be solid units that work for a good long time, as long as you don't use the wrong power supply. But the CD units were the complete opposite when it comes to quality. You did get a cool collection of software and goodies when you purchased the unit brand new. A music CD for the Tempest 2000 game, a demo of the critically acclaimed Myst, and full versions of VidGrid and Blue Lightning, which would have been suitable pack-ins. The unit also included the VLM for when you inserted a music CD, and it was quite the interesting piece of software for the time. VLM stands for Virtual Light Machine, and it was basically light and line patterns that would move and flow in step with your music. It was definitely an interesting visual component to what is otherwise a strictly audio format, and it was worked on by Jeff Minter, the genius behind Tempest 2000. What couldn't this man do? So the Jaguar CD was released in late 1995 and was discontinued promptly in 1996 with the rest of the Jaguar stuff. The Jaguar could barely compete with the SNES and Genesis in the retail space, let alone the new juggernauts of the PlayStation, Saturn, and the ever-looming Ultra 64. Even the CD add-on couldn't compete, and really they already knew that. People were expecting this kitty to expire for a long time, as the writing had been on the wall for a while. I wish the Jaguar CD could have been so much more than it was, as I wish so many other products from this era of Atari could have been. But in the end, it just is what it is. But now I want to hear from you guys. What do you think about the Atari Jaguar CD? Did you have one back when it was released? Or did you acquire one much later? If so, what do you think about it? Do you think the game drive compatibility with the Jaguar CD is the way to go? And if so, why? I want to hear about all this and so much more in the comments down below. And before you go, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Doing these things helps the channel out so much more than you could ever know, and I appreciate it greatly. And why not check out some of my other videos? We do featured videos just like this one every Thursday, and a review every Sunday. So why not check out our last review on the 2600 Kids controller? And don't forget to check out my Man vs 7800 live stream this Saturday, March 2nd, at 10 a.m. Eastern Time, 7 a.m. Pacific. We're going to try and beat a different 7800 game every other Saturday, and this time we're going to attempt Sirius. Can we cycle the game, or will 7800 triumph over man? Join us at 10 a.m. Eastern Time this Saturday to find out. Okay guys, I'm the 7800 Pro Gamer, designed to be modular for future CD and game attachments here at the Atari Network, and I'd like to thank you all for watching. And remember, stay classy, Atarians.
All right, dude. So that was really cool.
So you're gonna get a Jaguar?